On a quiet night, the black sky was filled with twinkling stars. Police officer David Rivers drives a patrol car on a deserted road where the streetlights flicker like faint candles in the middle of the night. His heart is heavy with reflections on his private life, especially the painful breakup with his lover. The current job seems to be just a way to forget the sadness, but the emptiness in the heart still cannot be filled. As the car passed through the dark fields, David turned on the radio to dispel the silence. The music sounded softly, but it couldn't calm the chaotic thoughts in his head. He remembers fond memories, afternoons hanging out with his lover, and now there are only spaces left. Suddenly, the lights from a car in front of him caught his attention. David narrowed his eyes, trying to see better. The car stopped in the middle of the road, and there was something strange in the back seat. A feeling of insecurity rose in his heart. What happened to them? He wondered, his heart full of worry. As he got closer, David noticed a little girl of color in the back seat gesturing SOS by hand. Her gestures were like knife blows to his heart, making him unable to sit still. "I can't ignore this," he said to himself, deciding to stop the car and get out. David got out of the car, his heart full of nervousness. He approached the car, his legs were heavy. When he opened the door, he saw Peter Harrison, a middle-aged man, trying to stay calm, but his eyes could not hide his anxiety. Peter's smile looked awkward, unable to hide the tension in the air. "Hello, I'm a policeman. What's wrong with this girl?" asked David, his voice full of concern. Peter quickly explained that they were just returning home after visiting family. However, in Hannah's eyes, she didn't say a word, just looked silently into David's eyes, as if begging for help. Although Peter's papers were valid, the feeling of insecurity in David's heart grew. Hannah, with her big round eyes full of fear, was like a small animal trapped in a cage. David senses that something is not right and decides to track their car. "I can't ignore this," he said to himself. As the car began to move, David followed, his heart full of worry. A tense atmosphere engulfed him, and bad thoughts kept popping up in his mind. Why did she signal SOS? Is Peter her father? The feeling of insecurity grew as the car began to drive into a secluded road, where the darkness became even denser. David couldn't take his eyes off the car in front of him. With each passing second, his heart became more and more worried. He wondered if there was anything he could do to help Hannah, and what was going on in that car. The air was as heavy as a storm was creeping in, and David knew he had to act before it was too late. David drove behind Peter's car, his heart tightening. Every time Peter turned, he felt as if an invisible force was pulling him closer. The chaotic thoughts in his head made him unable to concentrate. "I have to do something," he said to himself, determined not to let little Hannah fall into the wrong hands. As Peter's car turns into a narrow road, David feels his anxiety grow. The headlights of the car illuminate the shadows of tall trees, creating bizarre shapes on the road surface. Hannah remains silent in the back seat, her eyes watching David's every move, as if she knew he was trying to save her. Suddenly, Peter slammed on the brakes, causing David to quickly stop the car. His heart pounded when he saw Peter get out of the car, his expression full of tension. "Why did you stop?" David wondered, quickly getting out of the car and approaching. "You shouldn't stop here," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's wrong with her?" Peter looked around, as if he felt threatened. "We just want to go home," he stammered, but David saw a panic in his eyes. "Hannah!" David turned to look at her. She still sat still, but her eyes seemed to be asking for help. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Hannah just shook her head, but tears were already streaming down her cheeks. David decided he couldn't wait any longer. He approached Peter, feeling as if something very wrong was going on. "You need to tell me the truth. Why did she signal SOS?" asked David, his voice hardening. Peter began to stammer, and the tension in the air grew thicker. I just wanted to take her home. We did nothing wrong," he said, but David sensed the falsehood in his words. "If you don't tell the truth, I'll have to call for more support," David warned, his heart boiling. Hannah, meanwhile, began to cry. "Please help me," she exclaimed, her voice echoing in the darkness. David's gaze met Hannah's pleading gaze, and everything seemed to wake up. He couldn't let her fall into the hands of this man. "Okay, I'm not going to let you go," David said, deciding to block Peter's path. Peter, seeing the tense situation, began to step back. "I didn't mean to harm her," he shouted, but the panic in his voice made David even more suspicious. David quickly pulled out his phone, preparing to call the police station. "Stay here. I won't let you run away," he said to Peter, his heart full of determination. Hannah was still sitting in the car, her eyes full of fear but also full of hope. In a tense moment, David felt like time had stopped. Peter stood there, his face confused and panicked, while Hannah was waiting for help from him. "Tell me the truth, or I won't be able to help you," David said, his voice firm. Peter began to tremble, and David realized that he might be hiding something serious. "I don't want to harm her," Peter whispered, his eyes clearly showing fear. "Then tell me what's going on," cried David, feeling like everything was on the brink of chaos. Hannah, in that moment, stepped out of the car, approaching David, as if she knew that he was the only one who could save her. David looked at Hannah, then at Peter. He knew that this was the decisive moment. Was Peter really a good father, or was there something dark lurking inside? The lights from David's car illuminated their faces, and in that moment, everything could change. David's decision will shape the fate of all three of them in this dark night. David stood firm, his heart full of determination and worry. Hannah, with watery eyes, looked at him like a ray of hope in the dark night. David felt the strength from her, and that made him even more determined. "Peter, tell me the truth. I don't have time to play this game," he said, his voice resolute. Peter, meanwhile, began to tremble. I just wanted to take her home. We don't intend to harm anyone," he said, but the sound of panic in his voice made David more suspicious than ever. "So why did she signal SOS?" asked David, his gaze not leaving Peter. It felt like a storm was forming, and he knew that things could explode at any moment. Finally, after a long silence, Peter sighed, his expression as if he had completely collapsed. "Okay, I'll say," he said, his voice weak. "Hannah is not my daughter. I'm just trying to get her out of a bad situation." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What helped her get rid of something?" he asked, feeling like everything was slowly unfolding. "She was kidnapped," Peter exclaimed, his eyes filled with fear. "I saw her being captured by a group of strangers, and I decided to help her escape. But now, I'm afraid they'll find us." David turned to Hannah, who was standing beside him, her legs trembling. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked softly, trying to create a safe space for her. Hannah nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "They kidnapped me while I was playing in the park," she said, her voice trembling. "They took me away and told me not to tell anyone." She tried to call for help, but no one heard. David felt a surge of anger rise in his heart. "Why don't you call the police?" he asked Peter, feeling like things were getting more complicated. "I'm afraid that if I do, they'll find her first," Peter replied, his eyes filled with anxiety. "I don't know what to do. I just want to save her." David knew that they needed to act immediately. "We can't stand here forever," he said. "We have to call the police and report this incident." Peter nodded, but David could see the hesitation in his eyes. "But what if they find us before the police arrive?" he asked, his voice full of anxiety. "We must trust that the police will arrive in time," David said, his heart full of determination. "She can't stay here for another second." David quickly called a colleague, informing him of the emergency. Meanwhile, Hannah held David's hand tightly, as if she was looking for safety. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm not going to let anyone harm me," David reassured, his heart filled with determination. "We'll get through this together." Just a few minutes later, the siren of a police car sounded in the distance. David felt a new flow of hope fill his heart. When the police car arrived, the two officers stepped out, their eyes serious and determined. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked, and David quickly explained the situation. Peter stood next to him, his expression full of worry. The policeman looked at Hannah, then turned to Peter. "You can come with us to clarify the situation," the officer said. We need to investigate this case. Hannah looked at David with pleading eyes, and he knew that she needed safety. She's not going anywhere, David said, his voice firm. She needs to be protected. The officer nodded, and they put Hannah in the police car, where she would be safe. David felt a sense of relief, but also knew that this was just the beginning of a bigger war. As the police car left, David watched, his heart full of hope but also full of worry. They saved Hannah, but the fight against the bad guys was still ahead. He knew that he would not stop until the truth was exposed and justice was served. After the police car left, David stood there, his heart full of concern. He saved Hannah, but what awaits him? Peter, whom he had once suspected, was now part of a more complicated story. David decided to find out more about the people who had kidnapped her. We need to find out who is behind this, David told his colleague, Officer Nanami, who came to help. Nanami nodded, her eyes full of determination. I have heard about a child trafficking group operating in this area. We need to gather information and look for clues. David and Nanami begin investigating immediately. They return to the park area where Hannah was kidnapped. David remembered what the little girl had told him, and they decided to check on the people around him. Some residents who live nearby said they have seen a suspicious car regularly appear at the park. There's a black van, an elderly woman said. It used to park there in the afternoon, and I saw a few strangers coming in and out. Thank you, David said, jotting down the information. We need to find that car. David and Nanami decided to follow the van. They asked for more people and collected information from security cameras around the area. Eventually, they found a photograph of the black van, along with the license plate. We've got a clue, Nanami said, her eyes gleaming. We need to trace this number plate to identify the owner. They quickly contacted the investigation department to verify the information. After a few hours, they get a response. The van was owned by a man named Victor Malone, who had a criminal record related to human trafficking. We need to find Victor, David said, his heart filled with determination. He could be the one behind Hannah's kidnapping. David and Nanami decide to organize a raid on Victor's house. They prepared thoroughly, contacting other police units to assist. When the police arrived, David was nervous. They have come closer to the truth. Get ready, ordered David, and everyone was ready to rush in. They banged on the door, and the noise rang out in the quiet space. When the door opened, David and his teammates rushed in. Victor stood in the middle of the room, his expression confused and panicked. Who are you? He shouted, but David didn't give him time to protest. Stand still. We're the police, shouted David, and Victor realized he had been arrested. You can't do anything to me, shouted Victor, but David quickly escorted him to the ground. Meanwhile, other police officers searched Victor's home. They found extensive evidence of child trafficking, including photographs and information of many other children. David felt angry when he thought about what had happened to Hannah and the other children. We need to take him back to the camp and interrogate him, David said, his heart full of determination. He will not escape this crime. When they took Victor out of the house, David felt like a burden had been removed. They found a clue and saved Hannah, but the fight against the bad guys continues. David knew that he would not stop until all those involved were brought to light and justice was served. We're not going to let this happen to any other child, David thought to himself, his determination growing stronger. The journey to find the truth and protect innocent children is still long, but he knows that they are on the right track. After taking Victor back to the station, David and Nanami begin the interrogation process. They sat across from him in the interrogation room, the light shining directly on Victor's face. He seemed confused, but David knew that he couldn't shirk his responsibility. Victor, we know you're involved in Hannah's kidnapping, David said, his voice calm but determined. Tell us what you're doing. Victor smirked, his expression full of arrogance. You don't have any evidence. I didn't say anything. Nanami interjected, we have found evidence in your home. You can help yourself or you will face more serious charges. After hours of interrogation, Victor finally began to open up. Okay, I'm only a small part of the larger plan, he said, his tone weaker now. There's a larger group behind all these kidnappings. Which group? David asked, not missing the opportunity. We call them Darkness. They operate in secret, and there are many people in the government, Victor admitted, his eyes clearly showing fear. I just follow orders. The information from Victor has opened up a new direction for the investigation. David and Nanami immediately set out to learn about the Darkness group. They gather information from sources ranging from old reports to incomplete investigations. We need to find the key members of this group, Nanami said, as they reviewed the documents. They may be operating right among us without anyone knowing. Based on the information gathered, David and his team decided to carry out another raid. They discover a suspicious location where the shadows may be operating. This could be where they keep the kids, David said, his heart filled with determination. When they arrived at the location, David felt nervous. They prepared well, and once again, the police car horn sounded. Get ready, ordered David, and the team rushed in. Inside, they discovered a dark room with many children detained. David felt like his heart tightened when he saw the frightened faces. We have to save them, he shouted. A dramatic confrontation ensues between the police and the Darkness group. David and his teammates fight with determination, not letting anyone escape responsibility. They were prepared for this situation, but the fierceness of the war still kept people nervous. Eventually, after a fierce fight, David and his team were able to rescue all the children. Crying and laughter mingle in the air, creating a sense of relief. We did it, said Nanami, tears rolling down her cheeks. David looked into the children's eyes, his heart filled with joy and determination. We're not going to let this happen again, he thought to himself. After the raid, David and Nanami work relentlessly to gather evidence and bring the people behind the Darkness group to light. They coordinate with other agencies to investigate and prosecute those involved. The key members of the group are arrested, and justice is finally served. Hannah and the other children are reunited with their families, and David is happy to see the smiles on their faces. The fight against the Darkness was still there, but David knew that they had won a big victory. He found strength in the children he saved, and his determination grew stronger. We're never going to give up, he thought to himself, promising himself that he would continue to fight for the safety of every child. After rescuing Hannah and the other children, David feels like a great burden has been lifted. However, he knows that it will not be easy for them to recover. Hannah and the other children need time to heal their psychological wounds. David decided to participate in psychological support sessions for children. He wants to make sure that they are not only saved but can also find joy in life again. We're going to get through this together, David told Hannah during a group meeting. While Hannah and the others begin the recovery process, David also faces painful memories from his own past. He remembered the times he had not been able to save the other children before, and the guilt came rushing back. I have to do more, he told himself. David decided to get involved in community activities to raise awareness about child trafficking. He began organizing seminars and educational programs, which aimed to equip people with the knowledge and skills to identify and prevent kidnappings. Meanwhile, the investigation continues. David and Nanami follow the rest of the Darkness group. They collaborate with federal and international agencies to expand the investigation beyond the region, seeking the group's contacts and partners. We need to get to the root, Nanami said, as they analyzed the data they collected. If not, they will continue to operate. Eventually, after months of investigation, David and his team discovered a large base of the Dark group on the outskirts of the city. This is the last chance for them to completely end the group's activities. We have to act now, David said with determination. They planned a major raid, mobilizing all the necessary forces. As the day approached, David felt nervous but also hopeful. On the day of the raid, David leads the police team. They stormed the base, and a fierce battle broke out. David felt the thrill in the air, but he didn't allow himself to panic. We have to rescue the children, he shouted. Eventually, after a tense fight, they succeeded in rescuing a group of children who were being held captive. The children's happy faces and grateful eyes made David feel that all his efforts were worth it. With the destruction of the darkness group, David feels like a new chapter in his life has begun. He continues his work with enthusiasm and determination, but now he also knows that he is not alone. Hannah and the other children have become a part of his life. They met regularly, and David felt like he had found a new family. "We'll always be together," he told Hannah during a date. David decided to write a book about his experience, not only to share Hannah's story but also to raise awareness about the issue of child trafficking. He hopes that the book will inspire many others to join this fight. "We need to keep fighting," David said in an interview. "Every child deserves a safe and happy life." David's journey is not only a fight against the bad guys, but also a journey to find forgiveness and healing. He has learned that strength comes not only from fighting, but also from loving and supporting each other. "We're never going to give up," David thought to himself, looking into the eyes of Hannah and the other children. "Together, we will create a better world." David began writing his book, titled Light in the Dark. He wanted to share not only Hannah's story but also that of all the children who have experienced pain and loss. Each page is a promise that he will never stop fighting for the safety of children. "This writing is not just about telling a story," David told Nanami during a coffee session. "It's also to encourage people to take action." After the book was published, David decided to start a non-profit organization to raise awareness about the problem of child trafficking. His organization not only focuses on helping children, but also provides psychological and educational support to victims. "We need to create a strong support network," David said at the organization's first meeting. "We can't let any child suffer alone." David began to collaborate with many other organizations, both nationally and internationally, to expand his influence. They organize workshops, educational programs, and community activities to raise awareness. "We need to make people better aware of this," Nanami stressed. "Only when people take action together can we make a difference." Despite his progress, David also faced many challenges. Some of the shadows are still working underground and seeking revenge. David realized that this war was not over. "We have to be vigilant," he told his team. "The darkness is still there, and we must be ready to fight." David began holding community meetups, calling for support from everyone. He wants people to be aware that they can contribute to this war, no matter how small. "We need your help," David said during a meeting. "Everyone can be part of the solution." David's organization quickly grew, attracting interest and support from many people. They started receiving donations and volunteers from all over the world. David felt proud of what they had achieved. "This is a big step forward," Nanami said, as they saw an increase in the number of participants. "We're making a difference." One day, during a gathering, David meets a woman named Sarah, who has been a victim of child trafficking. Her story touched the hearts of David and his team. "I want to help the other kids," Sarah said, her eyes full of determination. "I know how they're feeling." David and Sarah began hosting meetups for other victims, creating a safe space for them to share their stories. This helps many people find support and connect with each other. "We're not alone," Sarah said during a meeting. "We can get through it together." With the growth of the organization and new connections, David feels more hopeful than ever. He knew that this battle was still long, but now he was no longer alone. "We're going to keep fighting," David said, looking into the eyes of those around him. "Because every child deserves a safe and happy life." David's journey is not only a fight against darkness, but also a journey in search of light. He found strength from the people around him and from the children he saved. "We're never going to give up," he thought, determined to keep the fight for a better world. As David's organization grew, he realized that new challenges awaited them. The shadows are still active, and their members are looking to restore power. David decided that it was time to act even stronger. "We can't give them a chance to come back," David told Nanami and Sarah during an emergency meeting. "We need to coordinate with the authorities to completely dismantle this organization." David and his team begin planning a major operation to destroy the people behind the Darkness Group. They study intelligence, locate bases, and make a list of key people who need to be arrested. "We need a clear strategy," Nanami stressed. Everyone has to know their role. David contacted local and federal police units to coordinate the operation. They held meetings to share information and plan the raid in detail. "We will not let anyone go unpunished," a police officer said. "We will do everything we can to protect the victims." Finally, the day of the raid came. David, Nanami, Sarah, and their colleagues gather at a secret location to prepare. Everyone felt nervous but also determined. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time," David said, looking into each person's eyes. "Remember that we are fighting for the children." When the raid begins, David leads his team. They stormed the base with great determination. Everything happens quickly and tensely. Gunshots rang out, and the air was filled with suspense. "Let's go. We have to find the victims," David shouted, leading the group inside. After a fierce fight, they found the children who were being detained. David felt an intense emotion when he saw the frightened but hopeful faces. "We came to save the children," David said, hugging the children. "You'll be safe." The raid was successful, and many members of the Shadows group were captured. David felt like a great burden had been lifted. He knew that although the war was not over, they had made an important step forward. "We did it," Nanami said, smiling as she saw the rescued children. "This is just the beginning." After the rescue, David and his team began working with psychologists to support the children. They organized meetups to help them overcome their pain and regain their confidence. "We're going to get through it together," Sarah said, sharing her experience with the children. "I've been in the same situation as you, and I know you're strong." With the successes achieved, David decided to expand his organization. He wants to create a strong legacy to protect children and prevent child trafficking. "We're not going to stop until every child is safe," David said at a news conference. "This is our mission." David's journey is not only a fight against darkness, but also a journey to find the light for the children. He built a strong community where people came together to stand up for justice. "We're going to keep fighting," David thought to himself, determined to work toward a brighter future for all children. After the success of the raid, David feels happy but also realizes that things are not simple. Some members of the Dark group have escaped and are planning revenge. This makes him and his team always in a state of vigilance. "We can't afford to be negligent," Nanami stressed during a meeting. "They're not going to give up easily." David began to receive threatening messages from the rest of the Darkness group. They warned that there would be no forgiveness for those who interfered with their plans. "We have to be prepared for what's to come," David told his team. "They won't sit still." Despite the challenges, David has received strong support from the community. Many people have joined his organization, volunteering to help and raise awareness about child trafficking. "We're a family," Sarah said during a meeting. "We're not alone." David and his team continue to investigate to find out who is behind the Darkness group. They gathered valuable information and began to define new goals. "We need to find the origins of this organization," David said. "Only then will we be able to destroy them completely." During the investigation, David discovers that some officials in the government may have colluded with the Shadows group. This made him feel anxious and didn't know who he could trust. "We need to be cautious," Nanami warned. "If that's the case, we could be in great danger." David decided that they needed to have a plan in place to protect themselves and those around them. He contacted security experts for advice and support. "We have to be prepared for any situation," David said. "The safety of us and the victims is our top priority." One day, during a meeting with the team, Sarah suddenly reveals that she has important information about the Shadows group. "I know some people in this organization," she said, her voice trembling. "They used to work with me." "What information can you provide?" David asked, feeling nervous. "There's a secret meeting coming up. I can take you there," Sarah replied. David and his team immediately plan a second raid. They knew that this was their chance to completely destroy the Darkness group and bring those behind it to light. "This is our chance," David said with determination. "We can't miss it." Before acting, David and his team prepared thoroughly. They thoroughly studied the location, the number of enemies, and the ways out. Everyone felt nervous but also determined. "We're going to do this together," Nanami said, looking into each other's eyes. We're not going to let anyone suffer any longer. As the raid unfolded, an atmosphere of tension filled the air. David leads his team, determined not to let anyone go unpunished. They stormed the base with confidence and courage. "Let's go. We have to stop them," David shouted, leading the group inside. The war was fierce. David and his team faced strong resistance from those in the darkness group. They prepared for this confrontation and did not give up easily. "We won't give up," David screamed, determined to fight for the children. The fight against the darkness continues, but David feels more hopeful than ever. With the support of the community and those around him, he believes they will overcome all challenges. "We're going to fight to the end," David thought to himself, determined not to let any more of the children suffer. After an uphill battle, David and his team succeed in destroying many key members of the darkness group. They collected a lot of important evidence and arrested the culprits, bringing them to light. "We did it," Nanami shouts at the sight of the captives. This is a big step forward. During his investigation, David discovers that one of the leaders of the Shadows group is a great influence in society. This made him feel worried about whether they would be able to bring him to justice. "We need to be careful," David told his team. "He may have a lot of relationships and strength to escape punishment." When the case goes to trial, David and his team of lawyers work tirelessly to ensure that the perpetrators will be held accountable for their actions. They collect evidence, interview witnesses, and prepare for a lengthy legal battle. "We have to persevere," David emphasized. "This is our chance to bring justice to the victims." Throughout this process, the community has stood up in support of David and his organization. Many people have participated in campaign sessions, calling for media attention to the case. "We can't let these people go unpunished," one resident said during a protest. "We have to protect the children." Finally, the day of the trial came. David felt nervous but also hopeful. He knew that this was an opportunity for justice to be served and for the victims to find peace. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time," David told his team. "Remember that we are fighting for the children." During the trial, witnesses spoke up, recounting their traumatic stories. David was touched when he heard the weak but determined voices. They are not only victims but also heroes in this war. "We will not let this pain be forgotten," one witness declared. After days of trial, the court finally made a ruling. The leaders of the Shadows group were convicted of many serious crimes, including child trafficking and abuse. David felt like a great burden had been lifted. Justice has been done, he thought, his heart full of hope. After the trial, David and his team focused on assisting victims in recovery. They organized psychological, educational, and fun activities to help children find joy in life again. "We're going to build a bright future together," Sarah told the children. "You are not alone." With the success of dismantling the darkness group, David decided to expand his organization even further. He wants to create a sustainable legacy to protect children and prevent child trafficking in the future. "We're not going to stop until every child is safe," David said at a news conference. "This is our mission." David's journey is not only a fight against darkness, but also a journey to find the light for the children. He built a strong community where people came together to stand up for justice. "We did it," David thought to himself, looking at the laughing children. This is just the beginning of a brighter future. Although the war is still ongoing, David believes that with unanimity and determination, they will overcome any challenge. "We're going to keep fighting," he thought, determined not to let any more of the children suffer.